Good morning, everybody, and welcome into Ep.2 of our Manitoba Hockey Podcast here on G-Show Productions on YouTube and on gshow.ca, our website. We're brought to you by goaltenders, Can Central Sports Cards, and memorabilia, make Cannon fasteners and tools as well as Terrico. You'll be seeing slogans and websites of these brands throughout this shorter episode of the show today. Only one guest stopping by. Planning to have more guests for next week, but this is a good one as we're staying in the junior hockey space for another episode. Starting off with it is the lone guest today is Kevin Sword, president of the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, and great getting to chat with him about how preseason went. Chatted with him earlier this morning, actually about an hour ago now, in preparation for this episode. But yeah, talking about all things MJHL, how preseason went, the upcoming regular season, and much more here on this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. After that, we'll take you through some news of what's been happening around other leagues preseasons from around the amateur hockey scene here in Manitoba. It's going to be a shorter one, like I said today, folks, but it will still be a good one, and I hope you're excited for the second episode of this podcast. Let's get it started with Kevin Sort, the president of the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, joining the show next. Kevin Sored, president of the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, joining the second episode of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast here on G-Show Productions. Kevin, preseason wrapped up this past weekend in the league, seeing Burden beating the Portage Terriers in a shootout 4-3 to end it off. A lot of good things during the preseason for teams. Some teams not quite going the way they wanted it to, but yeah, just how was preseason overall for the league this year?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. It's always an exciting time of year. You kind of watch each roster build from the start of preseason till the final games. And, obviously the first few games, there's a lot of young players, a lot of young prospects in the lineup. And then as teams move through preseason, it starts to be more of their veterans involved, and then almost close to their final roster in their last game. No, I was impressed. There was lots of really nice goals scored, some very competitive hockey games. Lots of players that had very strong seasons that returned for this year. We'll have a number of Division One committed kids already in the league to start off the season. There's a number of players that are playing in the WHL right now that may or may not be back, and that stuff's great. That's why the league exists. It's a development league. We're trying to advance players and give them opportunities to advance to higher levels of hockey, and I think we've done that year after year over the last 4 or 5 years, and just seeing the talent of young players that are hoping to earn a spot in the MJHL is, for me, it's really impressive and really neat to see, and it's a testament to all the hard work that the teams have done. And now we turn the page and it's time for the real stuff starting on Friday.
Yeah, and four games are going to be on tap for this Friday for the league's season openers. And yeah, I mean, there's been players who have moved on to the NHL from this league who have moved on to play at the collegiate level at NCAA. So the MJ definitely, I think, touching on your point of it being a developmental league, definitely have seen that throughout the history of time. But the Northern Blizzard, Manitoba Blizzard, that is 4-0, best preseason record. Winkler going 2-0, two competitive games against the Pistons. For this Blizzard team, of course, the selling the team to another new ownership, they've started off really well in this new era of Blizzard hockey.
Yeah, I think the turnaround started last year with the hiring of their head coach, Eric Labrosse. He was actually ended up being the coach of the year last year, and he did a really good job of turning the program around and turning the culture around. Obviously, they had a very successful season last year, losing out in a very tight series to Steinbach. But now he had his first full summer of recruitment, and they have a lot of players that returned, and it's obviously he's got that team playing well. And I think preseason's always tough to really make guesses on how the team will be in the regular season. But I think with their last two games against Flin Flon, that's always a perennially strong team. And for them to win both those games I think says a lot, and it will. They're looking to be very competitive out of the start to build off what they've done last year, and with the new ownership group, it's a local ownership group, so they have a lot of pride in the community. Obviously, they changed their name to incorporate more of northern Manitoba and not just the PA and OCN. They want to be the team for northern Manitoba and all those communities. So they're really building something nice. They've done a lot of hard work, and I know they're very excited to get year two going under the realm of Eric, and then obviously year one under the realm of the new ownership group.
Going to be exciting to see how they do this season. Of course, Winkler coming in as the defending champs, as mentioned, going undefeated this preseason. For the Steinbach Pistons, I mean, this is a team that won a championship back in 2018, made it to the finals against Winkler last year. We've seen the Portage Terriers' dominance throughout the years, Dolphin winning the year before Winkler. Talk about, I guess, the landscape of the league. Have you seen it change throughout the years, post-COVID, most notably, or has it always kind of been competitive?
Yeah, I think that's always been one of the strengths of the league is the competitiveness from top to bottom. Um, there's not really any easy games in the league on any given night, and again, that's a testament to the hard work of the organizations and the coaching staff and the players. When you have that competitive environment every night, it forces players and coaches to be prepared for every given night. It provides an elite opportunity and environment to get better in, to develop, to push you to new levels. And then obviously with the influx of talent that we've been seeing over the last few years, especially of younger players coming in, that all just culminates with a very strong league. And we expect it to be very, very competitive once again this year, from top to bottom. I think, there'll be some strong. Winkler's obviously defending champion, and Steinbach's always a perennially team that's right pushing for a championship every year. And Portage and Dauphin and Verdun and Northern Manitoba and Niverville, I think, is going to have a strong year, and they already have 3 Division 1 commits in their roster right now, with a couple players that are going to attract NHL interest this season. So there should be a lot of excitement and a lot of eyes, and a lot of people following the league. And I think that's something else that I've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, post COVID, is that there's generally more excitement around the league, more people following what's going on, following teams, following players. Um, Opening weekend's always special because that's, usually you're going to see sold out arenas, you're going to see big crowds, a lot of excitement. All those communities, most of our communities in the MJHL, their teams are like the NHL to them. So
Right.
that's the big market team. And I know from talking with many people across Manitoba, especially in those communities, there's a lot of excitement building for this weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, for myself, just started getting back into covering the junior scene starting last year, and you can really see the passion for this scene in the sport in the province specifically. And yeah, I think with the addition too of streaming services like Flow Hockey that you guys have gone with and what we're doing now, I think that there's more ways than ever to watch games too, which is a great part about this all. It's easily accessible now if you can't make it to the rink. And great to hear that, rinks seem like they're consistently sold out, especially during opening weekend. And my apologies, I said 4 games. There's 5 games to open up the regular season. A big one starting off with the finals rematch in the Winkler Flyers and the Steinbach Pistons, Swan Valley taking on the Northern Manitoba Blizzard, just to name a few of the matchups. But yeah, looking ahead to this season ahead, Winkler looking to defend the championship. Of course, you mentioned teams like Steinbach, Portage, Verdun as well. I guess the expectations heading into this regular season for who's going to challenge a team like Winkler or who's looking good heading in.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It always, takes a little while to shake out to see really who's going to be at the top of each division. But both divisions have been very, very competitive, year in and year out. And, especially with the fact that only the top 4 teams from each division get into playoffs, there's always the last few years we haven't known our playoff matchups until the last weekend or two, so it's always been right down to the wire, and it'll be good. I know Steinbach and Portage and the Dolphins and Verdens and Winklers, they continue to raise and push the standard, and the teams, outside of that continue to push and try to get to that standard. And I think, you're always seeing different teams coming into the playoffs. Some won't make it one year, then they're there the next year. So when you have that standard that's continually being pushed and trying to be elevated, that just forces everyone to reach that standard, which is a good thing overall for the league.
One last question before I let you go here, Coach. Any sleeper this year that maybe hasn't been being talked about that much among people within the MJHL, or someone we haven't talked about here on the show yet?
Oh, that's a tough one. I usually don't weigh into these things, but no, I think there'll be a few sleeper teams. And I mean, sleeper too is the way I look at it is because we're a development league. Obviously, you want teams to be competitive day in and day out, but you also want teams to develop players. And I think there'll be an increased level of players, getting Division I scholarships or getting the attention of WHL clubs. There's a lot of young players in the league. I think Selkirk has a really young, talented roster they're putting together. So those are the things I'm interested to see, is just to see the talent in the league, and then obviously the competitiveness and the standings. That's going to shake out over due time.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see, and an interesting point for sure, right? Because you're trying to win, but it's also a developmental league. So, going to be interesting to see how these teams kind of balance it, however their seasons turn out situationally this year. Kevin Sort joining this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, the MJHL president. Kevin, thanks for taking the time, and enjoy a busy season ahead for you and all the rest of the members in the MJHL.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And that was Kevin Sort, president of the MJHL, joining this edition of Manitoba Hockey Podcast, of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, for episode 2, brought to you by Make Canada Fasteners and Tools, Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia, Terrico, as well as goaltenders. And yeah, the MJ, as talked about, they wrapped up their preseason on the 15th, so on Sunday. Verdun, with the shootout win, ended up going 2-1-0-1 in preseason for the Portage Terriers. They once had only one game on their preseason schedule. It ended up playing 4, as I assume more got added on, going 2-1-0-1 as well. As for the teams that really stood out during this preseason in terms of their record, as mentioned, the Northern Manitoba Blizzard, looking to improve off of a very successful season last year. Of course, their coach getting the Coach of the Year award. They went 4-0, as mentioned. Other undefeated teams were the Melville Millionaires and the Yorkton Terriers, among certain teams that only played one game, as those teams were from the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League, down here for a bit of preseason games, I guess. But yeah, as for the Winkler Flyers, they went 2-0, defending champs, played 2 very tight games against the Steinbach Pistons, and that season opener should be absolutely fantastic. A finals rematch from last year. I'm sure the returning players on both sides, maybe some bad blood heading into this one, maybe not. Or maybe we're just going to see a clean, hard-fought hockey game. Who knows what's going to happen? As for the schedule to open up the season, as we go into opening night, which is this Friday on the 20th, Northern Manitoba Blizzard taking on the Swan Valley Stampeders in Swan Valley at 7 p.m. The Dauphin Kings take on the Verdun Oil Capitals at Tundra Oil and Gas Place in Verdun. 7:30 p.m. The Winnipeg Blues travel to Selkirk to take on the Steelers at the Selkirk Rec Complex at 7:30. Winkler at home, probably going to be raising a banner, I assume, opening up against, as mentioned, the Steinbach Pistons, which could be the headliner of opening night action in Winkler at the Icon Arena. 7:30, and then finishing off with the Winnipeg Freeze making a trip down to the Niverville Rec Center to take on the Nighthawks at 7:30 p.m. There's also going to be 5 games that are going to be played on Saturday in the league, as well as 2 on Sunday. After that, league play resumes on the 24th with Verdun and Sikapa playing each other. We are going to take another transition here. I'll be back for some Manitoba U18 AAA hockey news here on this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast on G-Show Productions, and a shorter edition of this episode of the show. Brought to you by Terraco, make Canada fasteners and tools, Can Central sports cards and memorabilia, and goaltenders. Welcome back to the show. I've been talking about the junior hockey side of things. We're going to move over to the AAA side of things now, as, for the preseason in the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League, there have not been any scores reported as per the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League website at mbu18AAAhockey.ca. But I've done some digging around social media. I'm going to start getting in contact with more of these teams too. But I'm sure that this is going to be solved during the regular season. It's not just this league, but other teams leagues that we're covering here that their website's not too up to date, but it is the preseason after all. So cut them some slack. But as for what's been going on, I want to pull up the scores. I marked them down yesterday. Here we go. So for the Interlake Lightning, they played a total of 3 games this weekend, and pretty successful for them. 8-4 or 8-4 win against the Parkland Rangers, and 5-4 win against the Pembina Valley Hawks. They played the Rangers on Friday, played the Hawks on Saturday, and then ended up tying the Brandon Wheat Kings 3-3 to end off their weekend. And yes, it is just preseason. There is a lot that could change between now until the regular season. These might not be the best from these teams, right? But taking a look at the standings from last season, just for fun, for an Interlake Lightning team that made the playoffs 24-17, 3-1-0. Quite a promising start to another year for a team that may be looking to take that next step, right? Like, they were only 2 points behind the Winnipeg Bruins and the Winnipeg Thrashers. They could have moved up to, potentially 4th place, higher if they did a bit better. So, going to be interesting to see how they're going to fare this season and what should be another competitive year in the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League. As for the Brandon Wheat Kings, they would end up having a few ties this weekend. They ended up losing to the Southwest Cougars on Thursday night, as I should say, as that's when preseason opened up in Surrey. The score hasn't been reported anywhere. I just saw it on the Southwest Cougars X page that they posted that they got the win against Brandon. But a team from last year that I'm not sure how many returning players they're going to have. But what a season. Was it historical? I feel like it was. They were the class of the league, the cream of the crop. 43-0-1-0-0 last year. 270 goals for, 82 goals against, a team that won the league, qualified for the TELUS Cup, winning West Regionals at the Hockey for All Center, and making it all the way to the finals in the TELUS Cup, where they would fall short, placing silver. Are they going to replicate the same season? The odds of that are very low, I think. It was a special year for Brandon, and hey, if they could do something like that again, or do that again, I think that would be something unbelievable. But to say they'll do it again, I think that's a stretch. But this team, they should be a very good team again. Brandon usually has been in this league. And going to be exciting to see what they can truly do. going off of what was a historic 2023-2024 season for the Yellowhead Chiefs. This is a team that ended up missing the playoffs last season and hasn't fared so well to start off their preseason. The Estevan Bears of the Saskatchewan U18 AAA Hockey League also played them and kind of whipped them 8-2 on Saturday. But way better effort from the Chiefs on their Sunday matchup against the Pembina Valley Hawks, where they lost a close game 3-2, where Pembina Valley was outshot by the Chiefs 50-27. So the Chiefs dictated play in that one, a team that is obviously going through their training camp right now, seeing what works, what doesn't. A team that's looking to make it back into the playoffs. They finished with a 13-25-2-1-4 record last season, a bit better than the bottom two teams, way better than the Kenora Thistles, who will be returning, of course, this season to the league. The league also adding a 13th team in the Central Plains Capitals. But for Yellowhead, their defensive numbers and offensive numbers weren't the greatest last year. 142 goals for, 183 against, and that kind of led to what happened with this team with the results last year. But I'm interested to see what this season's gonna bring for Yellowhead. Do they maybe make a few more strides, a few more improvements in their record? I know that the female hockey scene down there has been really strong in terms of the talent that they've been able to bring in. They just haven't been able to get over that hump, but have been among the top teams year in and year out. The male side, it seemed a bit different, for this Yellowhead Chiefs team. They've had some great players in the past. Preseason hasn't been going the best for them, but we'll have to see, if the regular season will bring some much different things for this hockey club. So we put goaltenders on the screen. But yeah, as for teams that, I think obviously Don McIntosh mentioned the Winnipeg teams last year. All three of those teams finished top five. The Southwest Cougars, who had a pretty strong preseason from what I've been reading, finished second in the league last season, tied with the Winnipeg Wild with pretty much an identical record. So yeah, I guess the question becomes, there was pretty close teams in terms of the standings last season, from 2 to 8 for the most part. But how much does that gap kind of close between first and second this season? And do we see another team at the top of the standings this year in the league? Going to be exciting to see for sure. My favorite word, that's becoming exciting. And yeah, as for when this league starts, it of course starts on the 27th, the 2 Fridays from now. So not this Friday, but next week coming up. It's gonna be the Winnipeg Wild hosting the Southwest Cougars at the Hockey for All Center at 7:30 p.m. Then there's gonna be a lot of games in action on Saturday, 6 to be exact. Some good ones in there, like Brandon taking on the Winnipeg Bruins, Norman taking on Kenora. That should be an interesting one in terms of the Norman North Stars. And speaking of Norman, last season, a team that just missed out on the playoffs and, yeah, should be looking to potentially make that next step this year, depending on what they have. Will be interesting to see this year for sure. All the talent these teams will have on display during the regular season. We have no high school hockey league news to report, but we should have some for you next week on episode 3 of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. We're also going to be diving into potentially some university hockey next week on Tuesday morning, as we'll start talking about the University of Manitoba Bison's male and women's programs at the U Sports level. So yeah, that'll do it for this episode. Basically, we're going to take one last transition. I'll be back here for some final words on the Manitoba Hockey Podcast on gshow Productions on gshow.ca. Well, you made it to another end of this podcast, this show, the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Make Canada Fasteners and Tools, Terrico, Goaltenders, and Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia. Special thanks to all of those sponsors for continuing to support us from last year in Make Canada Goaltenders and in Terrico, and to our new sponsor in Can Central Sports Cards for joining the G Show Productions family this season. Your support means a lot. Your support also means a lot, you, the viewer. Thank you for tuning in on this Tuesday morning. If you want to stay up to date with when new episodes will be coming out of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, be sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications here so you don't miss any time when this show will come out. Comes out weekly on Tuesdays, and gonna be planning to keep it probably in the morning in terms of these episode releases moving forward. The episode time, the details for next week's episode will be posted on Monday, next Monday, on our Instagram, Facebook, X, maybe on our TikTok as well. We'll start including the handles of our social media pages and maybe even implementing a widget here on screen so they just kind of go through like our sponsors do in the top right hand corner. But yeah, more great content to come on next week's edition of the show. Special thanks to Kevin Soret, MJHL president, for coming on this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast as well as the only guest. We'll be back next week, like I said, with more news from not only around the junior hockey scene, but the female hockey scene at the high school level, potentially the male hockey scene, again in the AAA side of things, as well as maybe high school. University of Manitoba Bison's hockey potentially next week too, and a whole lot of fun on Manitoba Hockey, the podcast, here on gshow.ca. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Take care.